Welcome to the MHP Exchange, where the riches are in the niches. We'll show you how to invest your way into mobile home parks with real strategies, tips, and behind-the-scenes know-how to grow your cash flow. Stick around. This is where smart investing begins.
Welcome back to another episode of the MHP Exchange podcast. I'm your host, Frank Rizzo, and today's episode is going to sting a little bit. If you're an operator and you're struggling through a turnaround project, if you're struggling through an infill project and getting those lots filled, this episode is going to sting because we're going to talk about why your infill sucks. And it's because you're not a salesperson. And quite frankly, your manager is not a salesperson either. And we've seen this. I mean, you go into these, and it is the craziest thing. You have a market that has a demand for affordable housing. You have a mobile home park with lots that are sitting empty, vacant, and you have the ability to bring in manufactured homes and offer the lowest price alternative on the market today. And yet you'll still see operators who are struggling with infill, that are struggling to meet the market. And it's not due to a lack of demand. It's not due to the fact that there isn't an affordable housing crisis or issue. It's because demand alone doesn't close deals. It's systems that close deals. And too much of what we see happening on the ground with operators, they think it's just the price point and that will sell. Or the manager who probably wasn't a salesperson to begin with, but now we're expecting the manager to go down and to sell the homes. And I'm going to ask you out there, for those of you who are listening that may own a park or may own two parks, how many of you get a lead or get somebody who's inquiring about a house and they have their manager just pick up the phone and handle the lead, and they leave it all to them with the expectation that the manager is going to do the follow-up, going to set the appointment, and then ideally close the deal? And if that's you, what systems, tools, or processes do you have in place for that manager to be successful? And if the answer is none, like many operators who I know, well, you're just hoping that that buyer walks into that house and says, this is the one. I am ready to buy this house. But as someone who's been in real estate sales for 25 years, even when the buyer, when you know that that's the best alternative for the buyer, they could think of every reason in the world to say no, but there's only one reason to say yes. And if your manager isn't equipped with the tools of helping that prospect through the process of elimination, if they're not equipped with the tools of follow-up and with the tools to create the different points of contact with that prospect, you're going to end up leaving sales on the table, empty lots in your park, and bringing in homes that just do not have someone who's placed in there. And that's the challenges that we all face, right? And so that's what we're looking to avoid. And I think by putting everything on the manager to handle the infill and doing it on all alone, that is hope. That's not a strategy. So why do managers fail at sales? I've in doing this for 13 years, I think our managers on a property level, especially if you're doing a value add project, they have to handle multiple things. They're involved in some project management, overseeing what's happening there. They're ensuring that the culture and the standards of the communities are being upheld. They're handling collections. And then on top of it, we're asking them to handle sales of brand new homes. There's 4 different items in their bucket that they need to work on. And quite frankly, not everyone is a salesperson. And not everyone has had sales training or techniques. So I think leaving it solely on the manager and then the expectations that they need to sell those homes, I think that's maybe asking a little too much, especially if you're not giving them the training, if you're not giving them the process, and if you're not giving them the additional tools that they need to be successful. And that's why infill projects inevitably fail. And that's why a lot of people or a lot of operators will tell you, I would rather take a park that's 80% or 85% of the way full, and they will shy away from parks that are 30, 40, or 50% occupied with all those vacant pads that in many times you could buy at a significant discount because they don't want to do the most challenging and difficult thing to do in this industry, which is infill, right? If you're going to tackle an infill project, you have to make sure that you have a sales system in place, and one that's going to deal with follow-up and different touch points for the prospect. One that's going to deal with, rejection or tolerance and give managers rebuttals that they can understand and how to, manage that relationship, right? And train them in how they need to position. Because I will tell you, one of the toughest things that a manager has to do in this infill or selling a home inside the community, because when I was a real estate agent, I knew I had the ability of taking that customer to 2 or 3 different homes to find the one they wanted. If that manager is now selling a home in your community, they might not have that ability. They might have the same home in 2 or 3 different locations, but they don't have that variance of homes, the ability to show them and give the consumer the alternate of choice to see what works better. So I've seen and spoke to, operators or people on the ground and how they go about trying to sell those homes. And I will tell you, I don't think you could sell a home to an end user. I think homes sell themselves. But I think in that process, they believe that, hey, here's the home, here's the price, it's affordable, you should buy me. And I think that's a very poor value proposition. Right? We always talk about, it's not the home itself, right? It's the benefit of what that home is bringing, your customer. What does that home mean? That home means that you're going to be in a professionally run, clean, safe, beautiful community, may or may not have some different amenities, amenity stack that they can offer them. And it's going to be positioned in a way where, hey, not only are you going to get a house that you need and a place to live, but you're going to be in a community that you're going to absolutely love being in, because we're going to make sure that standards are enforced and upheld, and that everybody coming in is going to have the same care and concern that you would on the home that you're buying today. And that's a different mindset shift that you have to make sure that your customer is getting that message. And just relying on a manager who you're hoping returns calls, or may not be able to follow up because they're busy handling maintenance issues, is a tall task. So ultimately, it's you, the operator, you cannot delegate sales. You cannot delegate that responsibility to the people on the ground. You have to make sure, you have to enforce those standards, and you have to create those systems and checks in place to make sure there's a process that's following the customer throughout that buying process to help them along the way. Because infill is so much more than just an analytical, spreadsheet analysis. It's an emotional connection that prospect is going to have with the home, but also with that community. And you've got to make sure that you have the processes in place to hold that prospect's hand, right? To offer them the financing clarity, to give them the consistent follow-up, because you want to make sure that that deal does not die after that first conversation. And I will just tell you this, guys, if you don't control the sales process, you don't control the absorption in your own community. It's so critically important to have a sales process in place and not just think because I have the most affordable house in town that's going to fill up, even in a community that needs affordable housing. And something to think about, guys, when I started bringing in new homes, I mean, the price of new homes, just the invoice alone for quality 3-bedroom, 2-bath, just in the last 6 years has gone up 35%. So the cost to get that home landed is increased about 35%. That doesn't include the cost to setup, which also has increased. So we're obviously that cost is getting passed on to the consumer, and the delta between where a new home purchase in a manufactured housing community and maybe the traditional apartment has shrunk. And because that delta has shrunk, your customer base has options. It's not where there was a 20 when I first was bringing in homes, you could say there was a 20 to 25% difference between a Class C apartment, 3-bedroom, and buying a brand new manufactured home that's 3-bedroom, 2-bath. That's a huge delta. That could make a big difference for a buyer. But when that margin is squeezed and the price of where a 3-bedroom apartment and a brand new home has gotten closer because the cost of that home has increased, well, the buyer is going to be a little bit more selective and subjective. And without a real process to hold that prospect's hand in place, I think inevitably you're going to have a slower infill and a more challenging infill. And you're going to end up avoiding some really great opportunities that are in there in the marketplace right now. Because to find a value add mobile home park that's 80% of the way filled, there's a lot of competition on it. But if you're looking at a park that's 35, 45, 50% physically occupied, less people want to take that on because more people are worried about that infill. And it's very easy to get delayed on an infill or turnaround project like that. So if you're out there, you have an infill project and you're relying solely on your manager without giving them the training, without giving them the best opportunity to succeed, your project is probably going to be delayed, probably not going to hit the metrics that you're looking for. And even if there's demand in the marketplace, you're probably going to miss it. So understand this, right? You don't need to overbuild. Here's what you actually need to build. You need to make sure your lead sources aren't just Facebook Marketplace, right? And they have to, your ads have to be a little bit more colorful than a couple of pictures and say, hey, look at me, I'm cheapest house in town. You have to make sure you have that speed to lead. When you have your lead come in, they don't want to wait 3 days, 5 days, 7 days to be contacted. People are in very much buy now mode. When they have that interest, you have to make sure you get to them quickly in one of the touch points, whether it's a phone call, a text, however that is. The faster you are, the better your chance of success is. You have to have a follow-up cadence. You have to make sure you have multiple ways of touching the prospect. They need to know going into the process, hey, what's the standards of the community? What's it going to take to be approved? What's it going to take to get financed? And you have to know what those options and what your buckets are. And then finally, you have to have a weekly accountability. When I talk to operators about their sales process, I mean, one of the things we look at every week, how many leads are we generating out of that community? How many contacts, how many showings, how many cancellations, right? What's our application rate from those showings? We have numbers that we want to make sure that are in place, and we can tweak along the way to ensure that we're hitting the numbers that we need to hit at, and then seeing where those sales are coming in from, right? Is it local? Are we selling more cash? Are we selling more financing? Do we have more increase for rentals? And we want to make sure that we have those numbers in place so we can guide, right, our marketing efforts and know exactly where our levers of success are going to be. So when infill fails, that doesn't fail at the manager level. It's not that the manager isn't a good salesperson. It's that there wasn't a good sales process in place, that you didn't have a process that was documented, and that you didn't have, outcomes that were owned along the way. So the best operators, they don't hope that homes sell, they engineer it. If infill matters in your return, you cannot treat the sales process as an afterthought. You have to make sure that you know who's contacting when the lead comes in, where that lead is going to live, where that funnel is going to live, what's the journey going to look like, how many contacts or touch points are you going to have within the first 30 days to keep that lead alive, and what are you going to do afterwards? And if it's just going to be on a script of paper put in the back of the, on your manager's desk, and you're going to hope that they get back to them at some point, something tells me that your infill is going to suck. I hope you found value in this episode. And if you did, I'm going to ask you a question. Would you help someone you didn't know who is looking to find, fund, operate their next real estate investment? If the answer is yes, then on whatever streaming platform you're listening to this program, give us a rating and send it to us at the MHP Exchange. And I will send to you, I'll share with you our 7-step infill sales funnel from contact to close, no fluff, no theory, what we use and what actually works. Until next time, this has been Frank Rizzo on the MHP Exchange podcast. Happy investing.